He was a private man.
He's an incredibly private man. In fact, one of the hardest things was trying to work out what he spoke like. You can't find a recorded interview with him anywhere.
Hollywood was built on glamour, polish, and the careful management of what the public was allowed to see. The studios had fixers, press agents, and entire departments dedicated to making sure the image held. But behind every polished portrait, behind every studio-approved smile, there were families.
Actor Diane Cannon was Cary Grant's fourth wife and mother of his only child, Jennifer. Both are producers of the series.
Messy, complicated, sometimes broken families, and secrets they carried for decades. These are the 17 most shocking family secrets hidden behind classic Hollywood stars. Number 17. Cary Grant. The mother, he was told, was dead. He was born Archibald Leach in Bristol, England in 1904. His father was a factory worker with a drinking problem and a secret second family. His mother, Elsie, suffered from severe depression. When Archie was 9 years old, he came home from school one afternoon and she was simply gone. His father told him she had gone on holiday to the seaside. A few weeks later, he told him she was dead. She was not dead. She had been committed to a psychiatric institution, possibly because of her depression, possibly because Elias Leach wanted her out of the way while he pursued another relationship. The exact circumstances have never been fully established. What is documented is that Elias remarried and built a new life that largely excluded his son. Archie moved in with his paternal grandparents, ran away to join a British acrobatic troupe around the age of 13, and traveled with them to New York at 16, eventually transforming himself into one of the most recognizable movie stars in the world.
He was born in Bristol, England. His father was said to be abusive and an alcoholic, and committed his wife to an asylum.
He didn't learn the full truth until he was 31 years old. By then, a Hollywood star, when a relative told him his mother was alive. He had her released from the institution, where she had spent nearly 20 years, and bought her a house in England. They never became close. She remained withdrawn, and the warmth he had hoped for never quite materialized. He later said he had spent much of his life fluctuating between Archie Leach and Cary Grant, unsure of each, suspecting each. In the late 1950s, under the supervision of a Beverly Hills psychiatrist, he underwent LSD therapy over the course of several years, taking the drug approximately 100 times, specifically to work through the trauma of his childhood and his mother's disappearance. He told Look magazine in 1959, "At last, I am close to happiness." He undertook the therapy not as recreation, but as a deliberate, methodical attempt to understand what had happened to him. The abandonment, the constructed identity, the 5 marriages that each failed in some variation of the same way. He took the drug approximately 100 times under psychiatric supervision and was remarkably open about it in public, at a time when nobody else in Hollywood was saying anything of the kind. It reportedly influenced Timothy Leary to begin his own experiments. Leary later cited Grant's 1960 Good Housekeeping article about his therapy as a direct inspiration. He died in 1986. He was 82 years old, and by most accounts, genuinely at peace by the end. His daughter Jennifer, his only child, wrote warmly of him in her 2011 memoir. The father she described bore almost no surface resemblance to the child who had come home from school one afternoon in Bristol and found his mother gone. Number 16. Bette Davis. The book her daughter published while she was still alive. Joan Crawford's daughter waited until her mother was dead to publish Mommy Dearest. Bette Davis's daughter did not extend the same courtesy. B.D. Hyman, born Barbara Davis Sherry in 1947, the daughter of Davis and her third husband, artist William Grant Sherry, published My Mother's Keeper in 1985 through William Morrow and Company. Davis was 77 years old and very much alive. The book depicted Davis as an emotionally manipulative, self-centered, and frequently intoxicated mother whose volcanic personality left wreckage in every direction. Davis had given her daughter away at a young age, not in the sense of adoption, but in the sense that when BD was 16 and announced she wanted to marry a British film executive 16 years her senior, Davis gave her consent and threw the couple a lavish Hollywood wedding. The marriage, to Jeremy Hyman, lasted until Jeremy's death in 2017. When the book came out, Davis's adopted son, Michael Merrill, severed contact with his sister and never spoke to her again. Davis herself disinherited BD and her grandchildren. 2 years later, in 1987, Davis published her own memoir, This and That, which she concluded with a pointed open letter addressed not to her daughter by name, but simply to Hyman. Davis died in October 1989. The relationship was never repaired. What makes this story linger is that the book was published while Davis was still capable of reading it, responding to it, and suffering under it, which B.D. Hyman knew and did anyway. Number 15. Hedy Lamarr, the inventor nobody in Hollywood knew about. She was promoted by Louis B. Mayer as the most beautiful woman in the world, and nobody in the studio system, as far as anyone could tell, was particularly interested in what she thought about anything else. Hedy Lamarr was born Hedwig Eva Maria Kiesler in Vienna in 1914, the only child of a Jewish family. Her father was a bank director with a deep curiosity about how things worked. He used to take her on long walks and explain the mechanics of everything they passed. She inherited that curiosity. Her first husband, Friedrich Mandl, was a wealthy Austrian arms manufacturer who restricted her movements and controlled her life, but who also brought her into meetings with military engineers where she quietly absorbed everything. She escaped the marriage by 1937, made her way to London, boarded a ship with Louis B. Mayer, and negotiated a Hollywood contract on the crossing. During World War II, working at the drafting table she kept set up at home, while Hollywood treated her as a decorative object, Lamarr co-developed a frequency-hopping radio communication system designed to make torpedo guidance signals impossible to jam. Her collaborator was avant-garde composer George Antheil, who contributed the synchronization mechanism based on his experience programming player pianos. They filed their patent in June 1941 under her then-married name, Hedy Kiesler Markey. Patent number 2,292,387 was granted on August 11, 1942. The U.S. Navy declined to implement it. The patent expired in 1959. Neither Lamarr nor Antheil ever received a cent. The technology was eventually used during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, and its principles became foundational to modern Bluetooth, GPS, and Wi-Fi communications. She received the Electronic Frontier Foundation's Pioneer Award in 1997, when she was 82 years old. She died in Florida in January 2000 in modest circumstances. She was 85. The woman who helped lay the groundwork for wireless communications spent her final years largely forgotten by the industry that had made her famous for her face. Number 14. Gary Cooper, the daughter hidden for decades. Gary Cooper was one of the most enduring stars of the golden era. Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, Sergeant York, High Noon. The image was simple, decent, quietly masculine. Off-screen, the reality was considerably more complicated. In 1937, Cooper had an affair with actress Patricia Neal. That relationship came later. The hidden chapter came earlier, with a Mexican actress named Lupe Vélez, with whom he had a tumultuous on and off relationship throughout the late 1920s and early 1930s. But more significant, and less publicly discussed, was the child born from his affair with Veronica Balfe, whom he married in 1933. His daughter Maria Cooper was not a secret in the sense that she was hidden. What was hidden, for years, were the affairs Cooper conducted throughout his marriage, including a widely documented relationship with actress Patricia Neal that lasted from 1948 to 1951. Neal was 26. Cooper was 47, married, and did not leave his wife. The affair ended when Cooper chose to remain with his family rather than leave for Neal. Neal later said the decision almost destroyed her. His wife, Veronica, known as Rocky, stayed in the marriage, raised their daughter, and maintained the household with the kind of dignified public silence that the era and her position required. Cooper died of prostate cancer in May 1961 at age 60. President John F. Kennedy, hearing the news, reportedly wept. Number 13. Dorothy Dandridge, the child she raised in secret. Dorothy Dandridge made history in 1954 as the first black woman to be nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actress for her performance in Carmen Jones. She was 32 years old, breathtaking on screen, and carrying a private weight that almost no one around her fully understood. Her daughter Harolyn, born in 1943 from her first marriage to dancer Harold Nicholas, was severely brain damaged from birth, the result of a nurse pressing too hard on the newborn's skull during delivery, according to some accounts, though the exact cause was disputed. Harolyn never developed beyond the mental capacity of a toddler and required full-time institutional care for her entire life. Dandridge largely kept Heroin's existence out of the public conversation. The little girl lived in a care facility. Dandridge paid the fees throughout her working years, and the financial pressure of maintaining that care, on top of the particular financial precariousness that black performers faced even at the height of their fame, was a constant presence in her life. She was, by multiple accounts, deeply devoted to Heroin and visited when she could. When Dandridge's career declined in the late 1950s and her finances collapsed, worsened significantly by a bad investment in a Caribbean resort that wiped out her savings, the money for Heroin's care became a source of acute anxiety. She died in September 1965 of a barbiturate overdose at age 42. Her estate was essentially empty. Heroin was still alive, still in care, still requiring support that was no longer coming. Number 12. Spencer Tracy, the marriage nobody talked about. Spencer Tracy is remembered in popular culture primarily for two things: his extraordinary talent and his long relationship with Katharine Hepburn. What is somewhat less discussed is that he was never divorced from his wife. Tracy married actress Louise Treadwell in 1923. Their son John, born in 1924, was diagnosed as profoundly deaf. The experience shaped Louise Tracy's life entirely. She founded the John Tracy Clinic in Los Angeles in 1942, a nonprofit organization providing services to deaf and hard-of-hearing children and their families. It still operates today. Tracy was a significant financial supporter of the clinic throughout his life, despite his complicated relationship with Louise. He and Louise separated but never divorced, partly because of Tracy's Catholic faith, partly perhaps because the separation had settled into a functional arrangement that suited both of them. His relationship with Hepburn was genuine and lasting. It ran from 1941 until his death in 1967, but it was a relationship conducted outside the bounds of any possible marriage, because Tracy remained, on paper, a married man until the day he died. Hepburn was not present at his funeral. She stayed away out of deference to Louise, who had every right to be there, and who was. The two women, both of whom had devoted significant portions of their lives to the same man, never met publicly in any documented way. Tracy's son John went on to work for the John Tracy Clinic, continuing his mother's work. The family that looked, from the outside, like it had simply dissolved, had in fact remained quietly intact, just differently shaped than anyone outside it knew. Tracy himself died on June 10, 1967, just 17 days after completing his final film, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which he made alongside Katharine Hepburn, and which neither of them knew, while filming it, would be his last. Hepburn said later that she could hear him having difficulty breathing through the walls of the set. She stayed as close to him as the schedule allowed. When he died in the early hours of the morning in his kitchen, it was Hepburn who found him. She had been staying nearby and was at the house. The studio publicly reported it was his housekeeper who found him, to protect Hepburn's reputation and spare Louise further pain. Louise was informed, and she arranged the funeral. Hepburn did not attend. Number 11. Marilyn Monroe, the mother she could never find. Her legal name at birth, in June 1926, was Norma Jean Mortensen, though she was baptized as Norma Jean Baker. Her mother, Gladys Pearl Baker, was a film negative cutter at RKO who struggled with severe mental illness throughout her life. Gladys was intermittently hospitalized from 1934 onward, when Norma Jean was 7 or 8, and was never able to care for her daughter on any sustained basis. Norma Jean grew up in a series of foster homes and spent nearly 2 years in the Los Angeles Orphans Home Society, despite the fact that she technically had a living parent. She was placed there not because she was an orphan, but because her mother could not function and there was no other arrangement available. She later said that being put in an orphanage when her mother was alive was one of the things she never fully made peace with. Gladys Baker was committed to a state mental hospital in 1934 and spent most of the rest of her life in various institutions with periodic releases that never lasted. Marilyn Monroe spent her entire career maintaining her mother's care, financially and, to the extent possible, personally, while simultaneously building an image that had nothing to do with any of it. The studios were not interested in the orphanage, the institutionalized mother, the childhood passed through a series of strangers' homes. Monroe herself was diagnosed with various psychiatric conditions throughout her adult life and was deeply afraid of inheriting her mother's illness. She told her psychiatrist Ralph Greenson that she feared ending up the way her mother had. She died in August 1962 at 36. Gladys Baker outlived her daughter by many years, dying in 1984. Number 10. Montgomery Clift, the accident that rearranged his face. Montgomery Clift was, in the early 1950s, considered one of the most gifted actors of his generation. He received 4 Academy Award nominations over his career. He was also, quietly and intensely privately, a gay man in an industry and an era in which being a gay man was not merely a social inconvenience, it was a criminal exposure. On the night of May 12, 1956, Clift left a dinner party at the home of his close friend Elizabeth Taylor in Beverly Hills. Driving back down the winding road, his car slammed into a telephone pole. Taylor was the first person to reach the car. She reportedly held his head in her hands, and when she realized his airway was blocked by teeth that had been knocked loose, she reached into his throat and pulled them out. She is credited by many who were present with saving his life. The accident shattered his nose, his jaw, and his cheekbones. He was reconstructed by surgeons, but the face that emerged was not quite the same face. The lines were subtly wrong. The symmetry was off. Clift himself referred to the period after the accident as the beginning of what he called his longest suicide, a sustained methodical deterioration through alcohol and prescription drugs that lasted until his death from occlusive coronary artery disease in July 1966. He was 45. His family, a conventional upper-middle-class New York family, had little framework for who their son was or what he was going through, and the private life he maintained was largely invisible to them. What they watched over the decade after the accident was a man coming apart, and there was no way from the outside to understand the full architecture of why. Number 9. Grace Kelly, the family she left behind when she became a princess. Grace Kelly made 11 films between 1951 and 1956. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress for The Country Girl in 1955. In April 1956, she married Prince Rainier III of Monaco and retired from acting entirely at age 26. The family she came from was a specific kind of Philadelphia aristocracy, competitive, athletic, Catholic, and not particularly warm. Her father, Jack Kelly, was a self-made brick magnate who had won 3 Olympic gold medals in rowing and who made no secret of the fact that his daughters interested him less than his sons. He reportedly told Grace more than once that she had no particular talent and that whatever success she achieved in Hollywood reflected well on the family name rather than on anything inherently special about her. Her marriage to Rainier was not, by all accounts, a love match in the usual sense. It was a practical arrangement that suited both parties. Rainier needed a wife of impeccable reputation and international visibility. Grace needed perhaps to escape the industry and the particular kind of constant exposure it required. Her family, particularly her mother, Margaret, was not entirely welcoming of the match, and the adjustment from American actress to European princess was not seamless. What her children have said, in interviews over the decades since her death in 1982 from injuries sustained in a car accident, is that she was genuinely devoted to them, and that the public image of serene perfection was real only in fragments. She was by their accounts a complicated woman who had exchanged one kind of pressure for another, and who adapted to it with the same discipline she had applied to everything else in her life. Number 8. Tyrone Power, the father. His son never knew. Tyrone Power died on November 15, 1958, on the set of Solomon and Sheba in Spain, of a heart attack during a strenuous sword-fighting scene. He was 44 years old. His third wife, Deborah Ann Menardos, was pregnant at the time of his death. His son, Tyrone Power Jr., was born 5 months later, in January 1959. He grew up with his mother, knowing his father only through film. The recordings, the photographs, the reputation. By the time he was old enough to have had a relationship with his father had been dead for months before he was even born. Power had had 2 previous marriages, to French actress Annabella, whom he married in 1939 and divorced in 1948, and to actress Linda Christian, with whom he had 2 daughters, Romina and Taryn. The 3 children from his later family grew up under very different circumstances from each other, shaped largely by which household and which country they happened to be in. Power's personal life had been the subject of careful studio management throughout his career, specifically around rumors about his sexuality that circulated in Hollywood without ever reaching the mainstream press. His close friendships with gay men, and what several biographers later described as bisexual relationships, were not publicly known during his lifetime. The machinery that managed these things was efficient. It was only after his death, and decades after that a fuller picture emerged. Number 7. Elizabeth Taylor. The fatherhood she gave away twice. Elizabeth Taylor was 12 years old when her family moved from London to Los Angeles, and her mother enrolled her in MGM's talent program. By the time she was 16, she was a star. By the time she was 18, she was married for the first time. Her first marriage, to hotel heir Conrad Nicky Hilton Jr. in May 1950, lasted 8 months. What was not disclosed at the time was that Taylor had become pregnant during the marriage, and that the pregnancy ended in a miscarriage following what she later described as physical abuse from Hilton. The miscarriage was not publicly confirmed for many years. Her family during this period was her mother, Sarah Taylor, who had managed and shaped Elizabeth's career from the beginning with an intensity that several biographers have described as controlling. Sarah Taylor selected her daughter's roles, vetted her relationships, and maintained a presence in Elizabeth's professional life that went well beyond what most parents exercised over their adult children. Elizabeth later described her mother in mixed terms. There was love, and there was something else, something closer to possession. What is clearer, looking at the arc of Taylor's life, is that the childhood she didn't get, the years of MGM instead of school, the adult decisions made on her behalf by studios and a very involved mother had consequences that played out across 8 marriages and a lifetime of searching for something she was never quite able to name. Number 6. Henry Fonda. The suicide his family didn't speak about. Henry Fonda was one of the defining actors of American cinema. The Grapes of Wrath, 12 Angry Men, On Golden Pond, for which he finally received his Oscar the year he died. He projected decency, restraint, and moral clarity in almost everything he did. His children, Jane and Peter Fonda, grew up with a different version of him. His second wife, Frances Ford Seymour, the mother of Jane and Peter, died on April 14, 1950. Jane was 12, Peter was 10. Henry Fonda did not tell them she had died by suicide. He told them she had had a heart attack. Frances had been struggling with severe mental illness and had cut her throat with a razor blade in the sanitarium where she was being treated. She was 42 years old. Jane Fonda has written and spoken about discovering the truth, not from her father, but from a movie magazine. She found an article that described what had actually happened to her mother. She was still a teenager when she found it. She has said that for years she didn't speak about it, because speaking about it meant acknowledging that her father had lied to her, and she was not ready to do that. Fonda remarried within months, a decision that Jane in particular found very difficult. The emotional distance between Henry Fonda and his children was a fixture of both Jane's and Peter's accounts of their childhood. Fonda was not, by their description, an unkind man. He was simply not present in the ways that mattered. The craft that made him extraordinary on screen seemed to have consumed everything he had to give. Peter Fonda's own struggles, including a near-fatal accidental gunshot wound at age 10, an incident that was never fully explained publicly, unfolded inside this same household. Jane Fonda said, late in her life, that she and her father finally had honest conversations in his last years, that there had been, at the end, something real between them. He died in August 1982, 2 months after receiving his Oscar. Number 5. Marlene Dietrich, the daughter she made her maid. Marlene Dietrich was the very embodiment of cool European sophistication, the Blue Angel, Morocco, witness for the prosecution. She cultivated an image of impossible glamour and maintained it with legendary discipline for decades. Her daughter, Maria Riva, born Maria Elizabeth Sieber in 1924, spent much of her childhood touring with her mother and, by her own detailed account in her 1992 memoir, being treated less like a daughter and more like a possession. The memoir described a mother who was alternately adoring and neglectful, who brought Maria along to film sets and across continents, but who also used her daughter as an emotional support prop and, at times, as practical household help. Dietrich maintained a lifelong, complicated, and occasionally overlapping series of relationships with men and women, while married to director Rudolf Sieber, Maria's father, whom she had married in 1923 and from whom she was never divorced. Sieber and Dietrich lived separately for most of their marriage, maintained a cordial relationship, and never formalized the separation. He died in 1976. She died in 1992, the same year Maria's memoir was published. The memoir did not portray a monster exactly. It portrayed a woman so consumed by her own image and needs that the people closest to her were inevitably, and somewhat inadvertently, diminished by proximity. Maria Riva described finding, in her mother's final years, a woman who had retreated entirely into her apartment in Paris, refusing to be seen, preserving what remained of the image by simply becoming invisible. Dietrich died in May 1992. She was 90 years old. She had not allowed herself to be photographed in public for years. Number 4. Rita Hayworth. The illness her daughter managed alone. Rita Hayworth was one of the great stars of the 1940s. The pin-up photograph from Life magazine, the dancing with Fred Astaire, the sheer luminous presence in Gilda, CoverGirl, and Pal Joey. In her later years, she struggled with what her colleagues and studios described as alcohol-related erratic behavior, missed lines, memory lapses, unpredictable conduct on set. It was not alcohol, it was Alzheimer's disease. Her daughter, Princess Yasmin Aga Khan, born in 1949 from Hayworth's marriage to Prince Ali Khan, was among the first to recognize that what was being dismissed as drinking was something more serious and more irreversible. Yasmin became her mother's primary caregiver and advocate, and she has spent much of her adult life raising awareness about Alzheimer's disease through the Alzheimer's Association and through foundations established in her mother's name. Hayworth was formally diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in 1980. The diagnosis, one of the earlier high-profile cases of the disease, helped bring attention to a condition that was still widely misunderstood. She died in May 1987 at age 68. By the end, she did not recognize anyone around her. The secret in this story was not sinister. It was something else. The image of a star so powerful, so constructed, that even her illness was misread, misattributed, and misreported for years by people who should have known better and didn't want to look. Number 3. Claudette Colbert, The Marriage That Was an Arrangement. Claudette Colbert won the Academy Award for Best Actress in 1935 for It Happened One Night and spent 4 decades as one of Hollywood's most reliable and accomplished stars. She was charming, professional, and famously private about her personal life. Her first marriage, to actor and director Norman Foster in 1928, ended in divorce in 1935. Her second marriage, to physician Joel Pressman in 1935, lasted until his death in 1968. By most public accounts, it was a stable and companionable union. What was discussed only in private and confirmed by people who knew her well after her death was that Colbert's close and lasting relationship with her companion Vera Freiberger, who had been her friend and housemate since the 1930s and who moved with Colbert to Barbados after Pressman's death, was the significant emotional relationship of her later life. Colbert and Freiberger lived together in Barbados for more than 2 decades. When Colbert died in July 1996 at age 92, Freiberger was at her side. Colbert left Freiberger a substantial inheritance. The marriage to Pressman served the purposes that the era required. The relationship with Freiberger was the one that lasted. Colbert never discussed any of this publicly, and no one who knew the truth pressed her on it during her lifetime. Number 2. Jean Tierney, The Fan, The Rubella, and the Daughter She Couldn't Reach. Jean Tierney was one of the most beautiful women ever to appear on a Hollywood screen. Laura, Leave Her to Heaven, for which she received her Oscar nomination, The Ghost and Mrs. Muir. She was also the center of one of the most quietly devastating private stories in the Golden Era. In 1943, Tierney was pregnant with her first child. She made a brief appearance at the Hollywood Canteen, the servicemen's club where stars volunteered to meet and dance with troops, and was briefly embraced by a female Marine who had broken quarantine from a rubella outbreak. Tierney was not aware of this at the time. Several weeks later, she developed rubella. Her daughter Daria, born in October 1943, was profoundly affected. She was born nearly blind, deaf, and with severe intellectual disabilities, and was eventually placed in full-time institutional care. Tierney carried this with a level of private grief that those around her described as foundational to her personality. The story took an additional, deeply strange turn years later. Tierney was at a dinner party in Hollywood when a woman approached her her and mentioned almost casually that she had once broken out of a rubella quarantine to meet Tierney at the Hollywood canteen. Tierney did not respond. She excused herself, went to the bathroom, and was violently ill. The woman, according to Tierney's own account in her memoir, apparently had no idea what she had set in motion. Daria Cassini, as she was later known, lived in institutional care for decades. Tierney eventually had a son with second husband W. Howard Lee. She wrote about the rubella incident in her 1979 memoir, Self-Portrait, with a restraint that made the account more devastating than if she had been angry. Number 1. Greer Garson, the husband, 30 years, her junior. Greer Garson won the Academy Award for Best Actress in 1943 for Mrs. Miniver and received 6 Academy Award nominations across her career, a record at the time. She was Irish-born, immensely dignified, and known for her poise both on and off screen. Her third husband was E. Buddy Fogelson, a Texas oil millionaire whom she married in 1949. That marriage lasted until Fogelson's death in 1987, but it was her second marriage, brief, curious, and never fully explained to the public, that became the family story worth telling. Her second husband was Richard Ney, who played her son in Mrs. Miniver. He was 13 years younger than she was. They married in 1943, the year the film was released. A casting decision, an age gap, and a wedding that MGM's publicity department handled with considerable creativity. Louis B. Mayer had reportedly tried to prevent the marriage, not wanting the optics of the actress marrying the man who had played her child on screen. They did it anyway. The marriage lasted until 1947. The 3-year gap between the film's release and the wedding was not coincidental. MGM had asked them to wait, to let the film finish its run before the public was asked to process the reality. They waited, then they married. Then they quietly divorced, and Garson moved on to Fogelson and the long, stable chapter of her life that she maintained until nearly the very end. She died in April 1996 at age 91, or possibly 88, since there was also, for years, a running debate about whether her stated birth year of 1904 was accurate, or whether she had adjusted it slightly in the way that the era sometimes required. Even her age, in the end, was something she preferred to keep to herself. There's something almost bittersweet about looking back at these lives now. The golden era of Hollywood really did produce extraordinary art, extraordinary talent, and extraordinary performances. What it also produced, quietly and consistently, was an entire infrastructure for keeping the real story out of the newspapers. The secrets didn't all come out at once. They came out slowly, through memoirs, through biographies, through the careful recollections of people who had waited long enough to finally speak. And what they describe, in almost every case, is not monsters, but human beings. Complicated, damaged, sometimes brilliant people, doing their best, or failing to, inside an industry that had its own very clear ideas about what the public was allowed to know. If this one stayed with you, hit the like button. It helps more than you might expect. And subscribe if you want to keep going. There are more stories to tell.